On a rain-slicked street in the heart of the city, a young woman with deep brown skin hurried past the golden glow of cafe windows. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of unpaid bills and dreams that had long since frayed at the edges. But when she saw an elderly man with Parkinson's being cruelly shoved into the cold, wet night by a cafe worker, she didn't look away. Instead, she ran to his side, offering warmth, a kind word, and a hot meal. Little did she know, this single act of compassion would ignite a chain of events that would not only transform her life but ripple through her community. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell to join our journey of sharing stories that matter. The rain had started as a gentle patter, brushing lightly against the cracked pavement of Willow Street. But it soon thickened into a relentless downpour, blurring the neon signs of diners and bars into shimmering streaks of crimson, violet and gold across the wet asphalt. Nia Jackson pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her slender frame, her scuffed boots splashing through puddles that reflected the city's restless pulse. Her breath curled in fleeting clouds, mingling with the damp chill of the autumn evening. 2 blocks away stood her small cafe, Mama's Hearth, or what was left of it, a tired, sagging building wedged between a cluttered thrift store and a laundromat with boarded-up windows. It was her mother's legacy, a place stitched together with love and stubborn hope, but now teetering on the edge of collapse. Tonight, though, Nia's mind wasn't on the cafe's flickering lights or its leaky roof. Her thoughts were tangled in a web of numbers that refused to add up: overdue rent, mounting medical bills for her grandmother, and the quiet ache of a life that felt like it was slipping through her fingers. As she passed the gleaming glass doors of Le Ciel, an upscale bistro, with linen napkins and prices she could never afford, a sharp burst of voices cut through the storm's steady hum. The sound was jarring, laced with anger and disdain, and it tugged at Nia's curiosity, despite the cold seeping into her bones. She turned her head, and the scene unfolded like a slow, wrenching film playing out on the wet steps of the bistro. A worker, his pristine black uniform stark against the rain, was shoving an elderly man out into the night. His hands were rough, his face twisted in a scowl, and his words stung like shards of glass. "You're making a scene. We don't serve people like you here. Move on." The old man stumbled, his thin legs buckling on the slick stone, and he crumpled to the pavement with a soft groan. His walking stick clattered across the ground, spinning out of reach, and his body trembled not just from the fall or the biting cold, but from something deeper, something cruel and unrelenting. Nia's heart lurched. She recognized the telltale signs instantly: the jerky, uncontrollable tremors of Parkinson's disease, advanced and merciless. The man's hands twitched against the wet concrete, his jaw quivering as he tried to pull himself up, his dignity battered but not broken. The worker hovered above, muttering about keeping the entrance clear, but the bistro's polished doors had already swung shut, its warm light casting the man's crumpled form in shadow. Nia didn't think. She moved. Her boots slipped slightly on the wet ground as she darted through the rain, kneeling beside him. "Sir, are you hurt? Can you stand?" Her voice was soft but firm, cutting through the embarrassment that tightened his face and made him avoid her eyes. His grey hair clung to his forehead, soaked through, and the frayed cuffs of his coat were heavy with water. He nodded faintly, his breath coming in short, shuddering gasps, and Nia saw the effort it took for him to move, each motion a battle against his own body. The worker huffed, his impatience palpable, but Nia didn't spare him a glance. Her world had narrowed to the man before her, to the way his trembling hands grasped at nothing, to the way the city's indifference had left him here, discarded like litter. She steadied his arm with care, her fingers gentle but strong against his frail frame. "My place is just up the street," she said, her voice warm, like a promise. "It's not fancy, but it's dry, and I can fix you something to eat if you're okay with that." The man blinked up at her, his eyes cloudy with confusion and a flicker of shame. For a moment he hesitated, as if kindness from a stranger was a language he'd forgotten. But something in Nia's gaze, quiet, unwavering, full of a sincerity that needed no words, made him nod, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Nia smiled, not the bright, practiced grin she used to charm customers, but a softer one, the kind that said, "You matter," without needing to speak. She retrieved his walking stick, its worn wood slick with rain, and looped her arm through his, her slight frame bracing him against the storm. Together they shuffled through the downpour, her steps slow and deliberate to match his halting gait. The city around them blurred into a haze of motion, umbrellas bobbing past, cars hissing through puddles, shop windows glowing with a warmth that seemed reserved for others. But Nia's focus stayed fixed on the man at her side, on the careful rhythm of their steps, and on the faint outline of Mama's hearth growing clearer through the mist. The cafe was her last tether to her mother's dream, and for one more night it could be a refuge. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Nia pushed it open with her shoulder, the sound brittle against the heavy quiet inside. The warmth from an old radiator in the corner rolled out in lazy waves, wrapping around them like a patched quilt. Mama's hearth was small and weathered, its walls stained with years of laughter, tears and late-night conversations. The air carried the comforting scent of warm rolls, lingering coffee, and a faint trace of grease, a smell that clung to the memory like a favorite song. Nia guided the man to a booth near the back, where the faded vinyl seats were still warm from the day's handful of customers, and eased him down, propping his stick against the table so it wouldn't slip. She watched his hands, still trembling as he tried to smooth his drenched coat, his fingers curling awkwardly like leaves caught in a gust, and a sharp mix of anger and sorrow twisted in her chest. How could the world outside cast aside someone so vulnerable? She rested a hand on the table to steady herself, then offered a small smile. "You sit tight, okay? I'll whip up something good. No charge, no fuss." The man lifted his head, his eyes shining under the flickering fluorescent lights, his voice raspy but sincere. "You're too kind, miss. Most folks, they don't even see me." Nia's heart squeezed, but she hid the ache with a nod, slipping behind the swinging kitchen door. The kitchen was cramped, cluttered with mismatched pots and pans, the kind you'd only find in a place held together by grit and love. The overhead light buzzed softly, but to Nia it was home, a sacred space, where her mother had once danced, between the stove and the counter, humming old spirituals as she cooked. Nia gathered what little she had left, a bundle of kale, a few pieces of smoked turkey, a handful of yams, and a wedge of cornbread she'd baked the day before, still tender and golden. Her hands moved with the ease of muscle memory, chopping and stirring, the familiar rhythm, soothing the knot of worry that had lived in her stomach for months. Through the narrow serving window, she glimpsed the man sitting quietly, his eyes tracing the cafe's worn details, the faded photos on the walls, the chipped mugs stacked behind the counter, with a look Nia knew too well. It was the guarded posture of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness, who sat on the edge of their seat as if they might still be asked to leave. Her throat tightened, but she shoved the feeling down, focusing on the sizzle of turkey in the pan, the rich, savory aroma filling the air, wrapping the battered tables and scuffed linoleum floors like a vow to keep going. 10 minutes later, she slid a steaming plate in front of him, kale glistening with butter, turkey tender and smoky, yams soft and sweet, the cornbread warm with a drizzle of molasses. She set down a glass of iced tea, brewed strong and sweetened until it hummed with nostalgia, the way her grandmother used to make it. "Hope you're hungry," she said, easing into the booth across from him, her legs tucked under the table, the exhaustion of the day pressing into her bones, but unable to dim the quiet pride curling in her chest. The man stared at the plate like it was a feast laid before a king, his hands trembling harder as he picked up the fork. But Nia didn't rush him, didn't look away, just smiled and started on her own plate, as if sharing a meal with a stranger in her nearly empty cafe was exactly where she was meant to be. They talked slowly, cautiously at first, his voice halting between the tremors that shook his muscles. His name was Clarence Brooks, and he'd been living on the city's edges for years, ever since Parkinson's had stolen. The steady hands, He'd once used to repair radios in a little shop on the east side. He spoke of long, lonely days, of strangers who flinched when he fumbled with change at the corner store, of a world that seemed to move faster and colder with each passing year. Nia listened, really listened, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth, her face open and patient in the cafe's warm yellow light. There was something about Clarence's voice, gruff but threaded with a quiet resilience, that reminded her of her late grandfather, who told stories of his youth with the same mix of wistfulness and grit. When Clarence asked almost shyly about her, Nia found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. She told him about the fire that had taken her parents when she was 9, leaving her and her younger brother, Jamal, to be raised by their grandmother, Miss Lena, in a cramped apartment above the cafe. She spoke of growing up on leftover biscuits and second-hand clothes, of how Mama's hearth had been her mother's dream, a place to feed not just bodies but souls, to make every guest feel like family. She admitted, her voice catching, that tomorrow she'd have to lock the doors for good. The bills were too high, the debts too deep, and Miss Lena's hospital stays for her heart condition were growing longer, the medications more expensive. Nia had poured everything she had into keeping the cafe alive, but it was a sinking ship, and letting go felt like betraying her mother's memory. Clarence didn't say much after that, just nodded slowly, his face solemn, his hands folded carefully in his lap, as if he didn't trust them to stay still. But his eyes held hers, and in them, Nia saw something like understanding, a shared weight of loss and perseverance. When the meal was done, and the plates were scraped clean, Nia helped him to his feet, his walking stick tapping gently against the floor as she guided him to the door. The rain had softened to a fine mist, the streets gleaming like polished silver under the streetlights. She flagged down an old yellow taxi, pressing a few crumpled bills into the driver's hand with Clarence's address, run-down boarding house on the city's north side, before turning back to him. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Clarence," she said, her voice thick despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Clarence caught her hand between both of his, the tremor strong, but the grip warm with something deeper, gratitude maybe, or hope. "I'll see you tomorrow, girl," he said, a small, fierce spark in his tired eyes. "Right here, same place." Nia smiled, wide and real, even as her throat ached, watching the cab pull away into the misty night. She stood alone on the cracked sidewalk, the rain misting around her, the faint glow of Mama's hearth behind her like a heartbeat struggling to hold on. The next morning dawned heavy and grey, the sky sagging low over the rooftops like a wet wool blanket. Willow Street was still slick from the night's rain, glinting faintly under the pale, reluctant light of dawn. Nia hadn't slept, the weight of farewell pressing against her ribs like a stone. But she rose early, pulling on faded jeans and a soft, worn sweater, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she could stretch time by being careful. The cafe was colder than usual when she arrived, the radiator groaning weakly against the damp, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a washed-out glow over the scuffed floors and empty booths. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys dangling from her fingers, drinking it all in, the faint scent of coffee grounds and fryer oil, the way the sunlight tried to spill across the checkered tiles, but fell short, the way the whole building seemed to exhale around her, tired but stubborn, refusing to give up without a fight. Today was supposed to be the last day, the final goodbye to everything her mother had built with chipped dishes and a love too big for the tiny kitchen to hold. Nia had decided she wouldn't let it end in silence. She rolled up her sleeves, tied on her apron for what might be the last time, and set to work. The pantry shelves were nearly bare, the produce bruised and soft in places, but she made do, pulling together pots of hearty bean stew, trays of cornbread, steaming pans of scrambled eggs and bacon. The smells rose quickly, filling the air with a warm, welcoming richness that wrapped around the walls like a goodbye hug. And they came, the regulars from the bus depot, Miss Ruby, the elderly woman from 3 doors down, who muttered to herself as she walked, a pair of teenagers in threadbare hoodies with weary eyes, drawn by the scent by the open door, by the promise of one more meal in a world that offered few. Nia served them with real smiles, setting plates down with a gentle hand and a kind word, laughing when Mr. Ellis from the thrift store teased that she should charge double for the cornbread, pretending not to notice when one of the teens slipped an extra roll into his pocket with a guilty glance. She didn't care. Today wasn't about money. It was about giving the cafe one last moment to shine. As the morning wore on, Nia found herself moving between tables, refilling coffee mugs, wiping down sticky surfaces, and exchanging small talk with the regulars. There was Mr. Torres, the retired bus driver who always carried a dog-eared paperback, telling her about his latest read. There was Miss Ruby, who insisted on blessing the food before eating, her voice soft but fervent. And there were the kids, who sat quietly in the corner, their eyes darting nervously but softening as Nia brought them seconds without a word. Each interaction felt like a thread in a tapestry she was weaving for the last time, a memory to carry forward when the doors were locked. She was wiping down the counter with a damp cloth, humming an old gospel tune her mother used to sing. When the bell above the door chimed again, she turned, expecting another regular, maybe Mr. Torres coming back for one more coffee, but froze, the cloth falling still in her hand. Clarence stood in the doorway, his posture a little straighter today, though his hands still trembled at his sides. Behind him, framed by the grey light filtering through the new rain, was a tall man in a dark, impeccably tailored coat. His shoes gleamed like mirrors, his hair was neatly combed, and his presence was striking in a way that made the small cafe feel smaller. He stepped inside after Clarence, his gaze sweeping the room once, quick, sharp, missing nothing before settling on Nia. The man carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to owning any space he entered. But there was something else in his posture too, a guardedness, a hesitation, as if he wasn't sure he belonged among the chipped mugs, sticky menus, and the faint hum of an old jukebox in the corner. Clarence shuffled forward, his smile warm and wide, reaching for Nia's hand with as much strength as he could muster. "Told you I'd come back," he said, his voice cracking just a little, pride shining in his eyes. The man behind him stepped closer, hesitating only a moment before offering his own hand. His voice was smooth but not cold. "I'm Marcus Brooks," he said simply. "Clarence's son." Nia blinked, caught off guard by the resemblance. Now that she looked closer, the same stubborn set to the jaw, the same flash of fierce intelligence in the eyes, though Marcus's were sharper, more guarded. She shook his hand, a palm rough from years of scrubbing floors and chopping vegetables, meeting the fine softness of a man who probably never worried about rent or grocery bills. "It's nice to meet you," she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was picking up speed for reasons she couldn't quite name. Marcus glanced around the cafe again, his mouth pressing into a tight line as he took in the peeling paint, the mismatched chairs, the small army of people cradling bowls of stew with gratitude, written in every line of their faces. He said nothing, but Nia could feel the weight of his silence, heavy and measuring. Clarence, oblivious, or perhaps just unbothered, tugged at Marcus's sleeve with a trembling hand. "I told you," he said fiercely, the tremors making his words jerk. "I told you she was special." Marcus gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and Nia felt something shift in the room, something subtle but undeniable, like the first crack of dawn breaking through a long night. She busied herself pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs, pretending not to watch, as Marcus helped Clarence into a booth, his movements careful, almost tender, as he listened to the old man's low, earnest voice. Clarence was telling him the story, how Nia had found him on the wet steps, fed him, sat with him like family, never once looking at him like he was a burden or a mistake. Nia moved through the cafe, refilling cups, clearing plates, keeping her hands busy because her heart was hammering too loudly, too raw. She caught snippets of their conversation, Clarence's voice halting, but insistent, Marcus's responses quiet, measured, but growing softer as the minutes passed. She wondered about Marcus, about the life he led beyond the cafe's walls. The expensive coat, the polished shoes, They spoke of a world far removed from Willow Street, a world of boardrooms and bank accounts, not leaky roofs and empty pantries. Yet here he was, sitting across from his father in a booth with cracked vinyl, listening like it mattered. After a while, Marcus rose, crossing the floor to where Nia stood behind the counter, the steam from the coffee pots curling around him like mist. His voice, when he spoke, was low and serious. "My father doesn't ask for much," he said, his gaze steady, locking onto hers. "But when he does, I listen." Nia said nothing, just waited, wiping her hands on a dish towel, feeling the silence between them stretch taut. "He wanted me to thank you," Marcus continued, his mouth twitching as if the words were unfamiliar, heavy. "I was going to offer you a check, some kind of donation, something to make it right." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the room full of people, at the way Nia moved among them like she belonged to them and they to her. "But now," he said, his voice softening, "I think we can do better than that." Nia frowned slightly, her old instincts kicking in, the ones that bristled at kindness from people like Marcus, people whose worlds didn't break under the weight of hospital bills or eviction notices. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice weary but calm, her eyes searching his for any hint of pity or pretense. Marcus's smile was small but real, and for the first time, Nia saw a crack in his polished exterior, a glimpse of something genuine. "I want to help you keep this place," he said simply, "not just with money, but with a real chance, a partnership, a fresh start." The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the worn cafe, through Nia's stunned silence, through Clarence's proud, trembling grin. Outside, the heavy grey clouds began to break, and the first slivers of sunlight spilled across the scuffed floor, golden and stubborn, full of promise. But Nia wasn't ready to trust it yet. She'd learned too many times that hope could be a fragile thing, easily shattered by empty promises or unforeseen costs. "Why?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "Why do this for me, for us?" Marcus's expression softened further, and for a moment he looked less like a man in a tailored coat and more like Clarence's son, carrying his own burdens. "Because my father hasn't smiled like that in years," he said. "Because he told me about this place, about you, and I realized it's more than a cafe. It's a lifeline for him, for them." He nodded toward the regulars, still lingering over their meals. "And because I've spent too long building things that don't matter, I want to be part of something that does." Nia's breath caught, and she looked from Marcus to Clarence, who was watching them with a quiet intensity, his hands folded tightly to still their shaking. She wanted to believe Marcus, wanted to believe in a world where kindness wasn't a transaction, but doubt lingered like a shadow. Still, something in his voice, in the way Clarence's eyes shone, made her nod, just once, small but enough. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's talk about it." The next 2 months were a blur of sleepless nights and relentless energy, the kind Nia hadn't felt since she was a girl, helping her mother roll dough at 4 a.m. in a kitchen that smelled of sugar and faith. Mama's hearth was closed for renovations, but it was far from quiet. The air buzzed with the clatter of hammers, the hum of saws, the chatter of workers, and the scrape of new life being breathed into every crevice. Nia was there through it all, paint flecked in her braids, sawdust on her jeans, working alongside contractors and designers with a fire she thought she'd lost. This wasn't someone else's project. It was her story being rewritten, one screw, one coat of paint at a time. Marcus didn't hover, but he didn't disappear either. He showed up often, not always in a suit, sometimes in jeans and a rolled-up flannel, clipboard in hand. His usual air of control softened by something Nia hadn't expected, genuine investment, even admiration. He wasn't just funding the renovations. He was learning the cafe's rhythms, asking questions about the menu, the regulars, the history etched into its walls. He listened when Nia talked about her mother's recipes, about the way Miss Lena used to sing while she scrubbed the floors, about the time Jamal, at 10 years old, tried to help by adding sugar to the stew instead of salt. Marcus's laughter, rare but warm, surprised her, and she found herself looking forward to his visits, though she'd never admit it. Clarence, dear Clarence, became a fixture too, arriving every afternoon with his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm, against the sidewalk. He watched the progress like a proud grandfather, greeting workers by name, offering unsolicited advice on paint colors, and sharing stories that seemed to weave everyone together. He told of his days as a radio repairman, of the wife he'd lost to cancer a decade ago, of the son he'd raised alone despite his own fears. The workers listened, their hammers pausing, and Nia realized Clarence wasn't just a guest. He was part of the cafe's heart, just as much as the checkered tiles or the jukebox. During the renovations, Nia reconnected with her brother, Jamal, who'd moved across town after high school, chasing a job at a warehouse that kept him too busy to visit. But when he heard about the cafe's revival, he showed up one evening, his lanky frame filling the doorway, a shy grin on his face. "Couldn't let you do this alone, sis," he said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of motor oil and home. Jamal started coming by on weekends, hauling lumber, painting walls, and teasing Nia about her bossy streak, just like when they were kids. His presence was a reminder of what she was fighting for, not just her mother's dream, but their family's roots, their shared history. The morning of the reopening arrived, with golden light pouring through the new windows, the sky clear and full of promise. Nia stood in the center of the gleaming space, her heart thudding like a drum. The floor tiles were new, clean, but still in the checkered pattern her mother had chosen. The booths had been reupholstered but kept their deep blue color, a nod to the past. The counters shone like mirrors, and a small framed photo hung behind the register. Her mother, apron on, stirring a pot and laughing like the world was still simple. A second photo joined it now, Nia and Jamal as kids, grinning gap-toothed in front of the cafe, with Miss Lena's arms around them. Nia wore a crisp new apron, but underneath was the same worn sweater, sleeves pushed up, her hands trembling just a little as she unlocked the doors. The crowd wasn't large, but it was full, familiar faces like Mr. Torres and Miss Ruby, old neighbors who'd known her mother, strangers who'd heard the story through word of mouth and crossed town to see if it was true. Jamal was there too, manning the coffee station, his grin wide as he bantered with customers. Just before the first guest stepped inside, Nia saw Marcus standing off to the side, not saying anything, just watching her with that quiet steadiness. And beside him Clarence, his cap tilted back, his smile wide as sunrise. That day Mama's hearth served over 300 meals, and not one person was turned away. Nia didn't stop moving, plating food, hugging regulars, showing new faces to their seats. But she smiled more than she had in years. The air was thick with the smells of cornbread, collard greens and roasted chicken, and the jukebox played a steady stream of Motown hits, coaxing a few brave souls to sway in their seats. Miss Ruby blessed the meal louder than usual, her voice carrying over the chatter, and even the teenagers from the day before came back, their hoodies less guarded, their eyes brighter as Jamal slipped them extra helpings of peach cobbler. Late that afternoon, when the rush had slowed and sunlight spilled across the floor like melted gold, Marcus asked Nia to step outside for a moment. On the sidewalk, he handed her a folder, thick, official-looking, its weight heavy in her hands. When she opened it, she blinked at the words before her. Incorporation papers, banking documents, a trust agreement. What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her pulse quickening. Marcus's smile was warm but serious. "It's a foundation," he said. "The Mama's Hearth Foundation. You'll run it. Every meal sold here contributes to a fund that provides food, support, and resources for families in crisis. People like my father, people like your regulars. We've started it with enough seed money to last a year. After that, the more this place grows, the more people it can feed beyond these walls." Nia stared at him, her fingers trembling on the papers. Her breath caught in her chest like it was too big to exhale. "You trust me to run this?" she asked, because some part of her, the part that had learned to brace for disappointment, still couldn't believe it. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I've never trusted anyone more," he said, his voice steady, his eyes holding hers. Clarence stepped closer, resting a shaking hand on her shoulder, his voice gruff but soft. "You fed me like family, girl. Now the world gets to taste what family really means." Tears burned in Nia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She looked at the cafe behind her, its windows glowing, the sign above the door catching the last light of day, and she felt her mother's spirit move through the space, like a breeze through open curtains. This wasn't an ending, nor was it just a beginning. It was a promise that kindness, real kindness, didn't fade when the lights went out. It planted roots, it fed people, it built legacies. Over the next year, Mama's hearth grew in ways Nia could never have imagined. The foundation took root, providing meals to families across the city, partnering with local shelters, and even starting a job training program for youth like the teenagers who'd once slipped rolls into their pockets. Nia hired a small staff, including Jamal, who quit his warehouse job to manage the cafe's operations, his knack for numbers keeping the books balanced. Miss Lena, whose health stabilized with better care, became a regular fixture, sitting in her favorite booth and regaling customers with stories of the cafe. His early days, Marcus remained a partner, not just in funding but in spirit, attending community events at the cafe and bringing his own daughter, a shy 8-year-old named Lila, to help serve on weekends. Lila's laughter, bright and unguarded, became a new sound in the cafe, blending with the jukebox and the clink of dishes. Clarence, too, found a home at Mama's hearth, volunteering to greet guests. His stories a bridge between the old and new. His health didn't improve, but his spirit did, and Nia saw it in the way he carried himself. His tremors no longer a source of shame, but a part of his strength. One evening, a year after the reopening, Nia stood behind the counter, watching the cafe hum with life. The jukebox played Aretha Franklin. Miss Lena was laughing with Mr. Torres. Jamal was teaching Lila how to pour coffee without spilling, and Clarence was telling a group of new customers about the night. Nia found him in the rain. Outside, Willow Street was alive with its usual bustle, but inside Mama's hearth, it was something more, a community, a family, a testament to what happened when one act of kindness refused to stay small. Nia caught Marcus's eye across the room, and he raised his coffee mug in a quiet toast, his smile saying what words didn't need to. She returned it, her heart full, and turned back to the counter, where a new customer waited, their face tired but hopeful. "Welcome to Mama's hearth," she said, her voice steady, her smile wide. "What can I get started for you?" As the door swung open behind her, the bell chimed sweet and clear like a song returning home, and Nia knew this was only the beginning. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy. Thanks for watching.